Rick Bernstein.
Yes, sir.
Rick should be on. And now I'm going to unmute Dan. Okay, we should be good. Go.
Here. All righty. So welcome, everybody. This is an idea that I kind of threw out in my head about a week or so ago when North Sales held a very similar what's going on in the world kind of chat. They just decided to get a couple of their sale guys together and start getting everybody away from all the things going on in the world and just shoot the breeze and talk sailing. And I thought, yeah, why don't we do something like that here at CSA? And so I thought I would call two of my closest friends in the world, Dan and Matt. We go back to childhood, and we've sailed coast to coast and around the world together, and we know each other pretty well, I would say. And I thought, here's two guys that can help us talk a little racing from every level, whether it's for beginners or all the way up to the World Championship level. And so first, I'm going to introduce Matt. Matt, there are potentially a lot of people here. Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, so there you go. So Matt, Dan is showing a picture of the first time that Dan, Matt, and I sailed in the Lightning North Americans 29 years ago.
Oh yeah.
That was my first North American trophy. And it was the year of the hurricane. And Matt, I'll throw it over to you to, first of all, introduce yourself to people who don't know you. If you could talk a little bit about your background and your ties to CSA.
Matt Burridge. I first learned how to sail with Ted Beyer as my instructor up on Alton Lake at Valley before Carlisle existed in El Toros. I remember one day we had some sort of a practice at the Ladue High School pool in El Toros.
Wow.
There were no fans. We were just rigging boats and floating around.
Yeah.
From there, it's true, man. And from there, my dad and I were teammates for years and years, and we got to the point where we actually got to be pretty good and started traveling around. And I've done 23 Lightning North Americans, won 2 of them, and 7 Lightning Worlds, both skippering and crewing. And one of the most fantastic things is the people that you meet on a journey like that. Got probably too many stories, which I won't go into, but I've got a lot of stories with Rick and Dan and how we just love to beat South Americans if we can. And being an amateur team at that point in time, it was always a thrill to be competitive with men and women who do it for a living. Love Carlisle, love the lessons that place teaches and how much fun we have. And that's about that.
Yeah. And Matt and I go back to, Matt knew me when I was in diapers because we were neighbors growing up.
I was your babysitter, dude.
We go way back. And Dan and I and Matt, probably close to junior high, I guess, when we all met. And so Dan, if you take a minute and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your sailing experience.
Well, Dan Moriarty, and I've been sailing over Carlisle probably since I was 5 years old. I'm younger than Rick and Matt, but not a whole lot. So that's probably 50 years now over there. But my dad had a small Venture 21 out of West Access as a kid, and we really just sailed on Sundays, day sailing. And then I met these guys. I guess the Zurban group brought me up to CSA as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, and I started sailing in the Lightning group and met all you guys. And then history took off after that, as you two know for sure. But I mean, I did a lot of the, I don't know how many North Americans I've done, and Worlds I've done quite a few also. Pretty much all of that was crewing in Lightnings. I have skippered 1 or 2 North Americans, or 3 maybe, I can't remember, but most of it's crewing. I learned a ton at a young age, starting to crew with people in the Lightning class, Matt being one of them, and some other people in the class that you guys know, Bob Wardwell early on. When I was in my 20s, took me to my first Worlds down in Cartagena, Colombia. And I just got the bug to do a lot of that stuff. So I try to make sure I try to get on with boats and good boats if I could to learn more. And I just learned a ton going forward. I've done 8 Chicago to Mackinac Island races on big boats. So I have always sailed big boats also. on Saturdays, usually growing up through my 30s and 40s, I guess. And then always sailed at CSA until probably the last few years.
Right.
So.
Very good. Well, thanks you guys for both joining us. And regarding, I want to just real quick about what's going on in the world with everybody. We're not going to go into politics here. We're not going to talk about the virus other than I hope everybody's safe and everybody's doing well and doing the right thing and keeping everybody safe out there. So you guys let's start talking about the importance of a lot of time on the water, a lot of crewing, a lot of sailing and driving and what kind of brought you guys to the place you are today, starting when you were young, because as you guys know, I teach this adult sail camp where all these people are in their 20s and 30s. And then when they hear us talk about we've been doing this since childbirth, I tell people it's important to start as young as you can, but it's okay to start later in life. And here are the reasons why, you guys. So talk a little bit about that.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll lead off. I was always looking for good crew, good teammates, and what that meant was people I had fun with. For 8 years, was it Dan? 8 or 9 years over at CSA, when we were sailing together, we would switch off skippering and crewing every race.
Yep.
And from my view, what that did was it kind of got us thinking alike, or at least on the same page. And our boat handling got really good because we knew what was possible and we knew what we shouldn't do, basically. And it became kind of an unspoken thing. And then Rick sort of stepped into that and we gelled right away. And then later, Dan and Toby and I sailed together. And so it was always sort of a group that got along really well on the water and off. And that made it possible for us to do as well as we have in some of these big events, because sometimes they're stressful. You need to be able to laugh at stuff. Dan especially has a gift for being able to laugh at other people. So I'll hand it over to you.
Well, I think you're right. You want to enjoy your time on the water and enjoy the people that you're with, because you do spend, at these big events, you spend 8-9 hours a day on the water, it seems like. Because a lot of places don't have the luxury that CSA has, where you can go out and sail a few races in the morning and come in for lunch. A lot of places you are out there all day, and I'm sure a lot of people know that if you've left town to do any regatta at all, you've learned that we have a pretty good spot on the planet to sail as far as venue for the size boats we sail out of CSA, for sure. But what I was trying to remember is, as you sail and get competitive on boats, the number of years that you combined in one boat becomes, it's kind of scary sometimes. Like
Scary now.
Rick and I even when we sailed years ago, we had a fair amount of years in a Lightning, not necessarily all together, but a lot of years in a Lightning. Yeah. And the 09 Worlds that I did with Toby and with crewing for Matt Fisher, they did a survey at that event. And they asked your age, how long you've been sailing, how long you've been sailing Lightning specifically. And it was very interesting that Toby, Matt, and I were the second long amount of years sailing Lightnings at the event. There was one other boat, it was the Stark boat, Jody and David and Ian Jones, had a few more years on us, probably because Toby's a little younger than any of them. But they're not here to hear that. So
Very, very diplomatic.
But I thought that was interesting to see because there's just little things that go on in a boat at a big event with a lot of boats in an event, 60 boats that happen, and you need to rely on your teammates. As we all know, sailing the three of us together, we've all sailed very well with any configuration of three of us or two of us with somebody else. I think just being able to rely on that is very important when the rubber meets the road, if you will.
So without the ability to kind of turn back the clock so that you can get more years in with your teammates, we do live in a great age where a click of the mouse can get you access to a lot of information. And the sailing world is much more open, I think, than it used to be about technique and about various different things, either whether it's going fast or getting your boat ready or crew work ideas. So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of tap into the experience of other teams or other sailors. And I've, availed myself of that when I've had to get into a different type of boat. And I like to jump from one class to another because I always learn something. And for me, the Lightning is always home. So when I come back to home, I've always learned something that I can use. And each time we did that, it sort of ratcheted us up a level or a half level or gave us a little different view. And that can be a ton of fun too.
Yeah. So Matt, and Dan, and so teams that are new, really new. Let's talk about some new sailors. Some of them may be here joining us. A little bit, maybe a short list of things to concentrate on in the beginning as you start to get into the racing game.
Well, the first thing I would do would be to find out who's approachable and buy him a beer and start asking questions.
Yeah.
because
So-
that's an accelerant.
Open up with them. Bring them into the group.
Oh, absolutely. We've got a great sport in that it's got a really strong social aspect to it that's really very different from other sports that have a professional league or Olympic sports. And whether those are your goals or not, there's this great cross-pollination that can happen when you're not competing, when you're hanging. And that's really an opportunity. And there are some introverts around, and that's cool, but there's a ton of extroverts in the sailing world. And sometimes the bigger challenge is managing that so that they don't kind of run away with the show.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. I think that the community is a lot more open now than it was 25 years ago to sharing ideas and getting ideas out there. I think you can learn a lot jumping into other boats and just learning, trying to look what the fast guys are doing, even in warm-ups, maybe, 20 minutes before the start, go out when some of the good guys are sailing, try to sail alongside of them. You may not be able to keep up, but try to emulate, like, what are they doing? How tight are they trimming the main? Where is their jib lead? If you can sneak a look in, if there's a jib lead. What's their crew position, fore and aft, downwind and upwind. We learned that sailing Flying Scots. And, we had sailed Woodworth's Flying Scot in a couple whales and stuff. And I remember we were second at the weather mark to the Harrises, Jim and Betty. And we worked hard to try to keep up with them. And we couldn't get by them. And we finally looked over, and they were sitting 4 feet further back in the boat than we were. And I said, let's slide back a little bit. And sure enough, we went a little faster and got by them before leeward mark. But sometimes you just have to take your eyes out of your boat and look at what the other guys are doing, especially if they're going faster than you. What's different? Is their bang on harder? Is it less? What have you. So just eyes out of the boat and try to emulate the guys that are faster or have been doing it longer.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember before sailing with you guys, which, by the way, that first event, 91, that was really my first with a solid team of really experienced sailors. And I remember going away from that event hoping that years of sailing with 100 different people on 50 different boats was something that would really help get that feel, that feel we talk about.
Right.
Which talk a little bit about that, Matt. We'll start with you on that feel that you do develop and what all that means, the feel of a boat. Mention that a little bit.
Well, okay. First and foremost, you have to kind of, like Dan was saying, figure out how the boat wants to go fast. With the Lightning, I'll use that as an example because it's got a lot of angles on the hull, all these chines and all this stuff. It gives you a really good visual as to how your boat heel and your boat trim should be because you can see where the chines are relative to the water. So you sort of use that visual cue and then develop a sense on the tiller of how much pressure you should be feeling. And at some of these events, the thing you can't really gauge looking at another boat is a skipper's steering technique. And that's where it comes down to the feel, the balance, the pressure. And, fast boats, generally a major reason why they're fast is because they've got good boat handling, which means good balance. They don't load up in a puff. They don't overheel. They don't over flatten. You know, there are various little things that a lightning will instruct you on, because when you do them wrong, all of a sudden you're going slow.
Yeah.
So you get good feedback.
Mhm.
But I wanted to actually touch on one other thing, and that's figure out who's good at what inside the boat. When I was younger and raced a lot more, I was a good starter. Well, as I picked up with a career and a family and everything, I wasn't able to sail as much, and I wasn't able to keep my starting technique to be strong. But you and Dan, you in the bow, and especially when we had Toby on board, were great at the pre-start stuff, and Dan is a fantastic starter. So, I mean, he used to give me a lot of shit because I'd be slow on the line and we'd be a rocket to the first shift on the beat, you know, the first quarter of a beat, which kind of sets the tone for the whole thing. So I came to realize that I shouldn't even try to start. I should just do what Dan tells me to do, and I need to just drive fast.
Yeah.
And when we did that, we won 2 North Americans, and that sort of, you know, was the aha moment about figuring out what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and get a teammate who can cover your weaknesses.
Hey, real quick, Dan, before you go into Matt, it's to coattail on that. I notice a lot of newer sailors, drivers who have crews sometimes that maybe have a lack of trust in. So the skipper ends up doing all the work, all the thinking, all the organizing. Talk about how do you release that? How do you get your crew, you trust your crew to take on these roles?
Well, I make them skippers so they watch how I do it when I'm crewing.
Good.
But then they develop, you know, Dan didn't really tell you how great a skipper he is. You know, the first time he sailed in the North Americans, he was 5th, which is an astounding result. And some of that is back and forth skippering and crewing. Back to your original question, that helps you develop a feel, because you can sense when the boat is going fast and you're in different places in the boat, whether it's a Flying Scot, catamaran, a Lightning, doesn't really matter.
Right.
You're getting
you two were crewing with me, by the way. So
What's that?
you two were crewing with me, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, and I remember I tried to load the pole too early and it fell into the water and parked us right in front of Collin Park. So that didn't always help you.
Yeah.
I don't remember that at all.
So, hey, so Dan, so Matt just talked about the feel that he developed from holding that tiller, but talk a little about as a guy who doesn't have the tiller, how to develop a feel or how that works for you. What do you do?
Well, when I'm not skippering a boat, I mean, from the years of driving a boat quite a bit, which Matt did regale me to drive his boat before I owned a boat, which was awesome. Learned a ton. I think both of us learned a ton.
It's fun. It worked.
But I think as a crew, and I'm larger than Matt, and I think I tend to focus on balance of the boat. If you're not driving the boat, then you can help balance the boat. So if you see a puff coming, or if you see a lull coming, you can have your weight ready to move either on the rail or off the rail.
Sure.
If you're on a boat that's heel sensitive, like a Lightning is, and most boats are. So I think anticipating when to move your shoulders, like I just move my shoulders 8 inches and lean out further, even if it's light air, the boat might just stay at the right angle of heel. And you don't have to trim a sail or pull the tiller harder to keep the boat going straight. So I think from a feel standpoint in any boat, like when I get up on Lake Michigan, I get a FAR 40 that has 10 people on it crewing. You can tell the guys that grew up in one design boats as you get a puff. They start moving to windward on the boat almost before the puff comes.
Yeah.
The rest of them have to be told to move sometimes. So depending on where I am in that crew, I start anticipating and saying, hey, there's a puff coming. We're going to be moving in 3, 2, 1 to weather. And you can kind of keep the boat going that way in a larger orchestration of people, because I can't do it myself on a big boat like that. So.
Sure.
Well, the bigger reason why we do that, and when I coach skippers, much as I helped Ian Schillebeeks and Ian Moriarty, is when they've got the tiller in their hand, I tell them they're controlling the brake. Every time they move it, they slow the boat down. So what Dan's talking about is how to steer the boat a little bit so that you're not using as much of the brake, as much of the tiller, as much of the rudder. And when you get to going really fast, I mean, this is sort of, the last increment of speed is to try to drive the boat without moving the tiller and be able to steer it through waves.
Right.
And
To that
that's
point,
that's where it requires a guy who's 6'2" with a 6'4" wingspan and two bills on him like Dan to be able to help drive the boat through all those little nuances as you go through waves.
Yeah.
And it really works. It's very physically demanding. It takes a lot of attention, but if you want to get to the windward mark in the top herds so that you got the chance to be aggressive off the wind, that's what it takes.
Yeah. Dan, were you going to add something?
well, just add to that. I was at a lightning regatta somewhere. I can't remember where Chet Proctor was doing one of his seminars before the event or during the event. I forget when it was.
Mhm.
But a guy asked, like in a lightning, when you get a puff and it's going to be too big to hike flat, what do you do first? You use your traveler, do you use your main sheet, or do you use your backstay? And Ched's response I thought was perfect. He said, well, if it's a puff I don't see coming and we're just going to do a wheelie, I use whichever I have in my hand, whatever I can get to first to keep it from doing a wheelie.
Yeah.
And I thought that was perfect. It's like, yeah, if I got a backstay, I'm going to hammer the backstay. But it's only main sheet. I'm using that main sheet. And I thought that was a perfect answer. It's like there's no perfect answer to that other than just do everything you can not to let the boat get a little out of control where you start using the brake.
Hey, Dan, real quick, somebody's asking, what's a wheelie? What does that mean?
Well,
Where you spin out, baby.
yeah, it's where the boat really heels up hard and maybe wants to head to weather, and then you end up luffing the jib, and that's really slow typically.
Or stalling the board.
So we sort of nicknamed it. We don't want to do a wheelie here in this puff. We need to hike hard or put a little backstay on or whatever if you're seeing the puff coming. And seeing puffs on the water is something that you can certainly learn over time. You can see them. And I know new people say, what are you talking about, seeing a puff coming?
Yeah.
But if you
look
go
for the
out
dark
to
spots.
Carlisle in light air, you can teach that pretty quickly, I think.
And you know what we do with our adult sail camp, you guys, is we get everybody up on the balcony of the clubhouse on a day that I can definitely see them out the window, and I get everybody out there and show them.
Yep.
Really relatively easy. Granted, it's a lot harder at water level, but that's a good way to do it.
It's different shades of blue or brown at Carlisle a lot. Yeah.
That's true.
Sail for the dark.
Right.
Right. And anticipate those darks coming. So,
Yep.
All right, great.
One of the best ways to kind of develop that feel you're talking about, Rick, is at our lake where you get a lot of puffs, is as you head into a puff, the first thing you do is you ease the sail maybe 2 inches just so it doesn't knock you over and you do a wheelie. You hike and then you trim. So ease, hike, trim, ease, hike, trim. And if you're in a sunfish or a laser, those are the only things you can really do anyway because there's no controls.
Yeah.
So it's a really good way to kind of get practiced in that discipline. And it works in a lot of boats, whether you've got a backstay or a main sheet in your hand. Ease, hike, trim is a great way to help the boat accelerate and keep the hull on its lines.
Right. Yep. And that is something that we've all observed with sailors that are relatively new, the importance of paying attention to that because of the amount of distance you lose when you don't ease, hike, trim as an example. Same thing with going downwind, Dan, when you see a puff coming. If you don't do it, talk a little bit about when you do it right and when you don't do it right, what you lose and what you gain.
Well, going upwind, if you break that jib and luff it hard, you were going slow. And while doing it where it heels up hard, I really think ease, hike, trim. I know Jerry and I on our boat now, our J92S, we do Wednesday Navy stuff, and sometimes just the two of us, and sometimes we're out there in a bigger blow, and so there's no crew weight. So we try to set the boat up, and that boat has a knot meter. So we did an experiment. I think Jerry's on here, but I think this is a year or two back, and he was driving, and I was the only one sort of sitting on the rail. And I kind of told him, I go, okay, in this puff coming, I said, ease that main sheet like 6 inches. Just twist it out to where the boat's comfortable, and you don't have to use the tiller or the brake, if you will. And we just saw that the speed just go right up. Even though the main got out and left a little bit, the boat was driving because it was driving on the jib, and then the foil under the water, the keel and the centerboard works. I think it works on a Flying Scot to ease hike trim. I've sailed those boats quite a bit too, and I mean, I just think upwind, keeping the boat on its feet is important.
Yeah.
You mentioned downwind. I don't really know. I think.
I got one for that.
Go ahead.
Down. Think about it this way: when you're sailing towards the windward mark, you're going into the wind. The wind is approaching you as you're moving into it, so you might see 2 or 3 shifts in a beat. When you're going downwind, you're moving with the wind. You may only see 1 shift as it overtakes you. So it's really important downwind, if you're sailing windward leeward, to pick the side of the course that's going to have more pressure, because that might be the only opportunity that you get. You're not going to get 3 opportunities like you would upwind.
Yeah.
So
downwind it's very hard to see the shifts going downwind.
So
some boats it's easier than others, but it's really hard to see the wind shift or feel the wind shift downwind.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that Toby mentioned.
Go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
Okay. While we're eating dinner, Toby said, about transitioning from windward mark to go downwind. If you're approaching the windward mark and you're in a 10-degree right shift, well, most of the time you're going to want to get around that mark and jibe right away. And knowing that when you're 50 yards from rounding that mark, whether you're approaching at port or starboard, we want to get on that port jibe as soon as possible. Whether you can execute a jibe set or set the spinnaker and get on port jibe to port.
Yeah.
Because if there's 10 degrees of right favor as you're going upwind, then downwind there's going to be a favor when you get on port. You're going to be aimed towards the leeward mark that 10 degrees further than you would if you stayed on starboard. Yeah. And a lot of people, I think, until they learn that, just stay on starboard until they get comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think before you settle the boat in that situation, it's like the fire drill of the set continues until we're on port.
Yeah.
So.
Well, a really good way to remember that is, if you're the lead boat, which side of the course did you come up? Try to go back on the same one. Mm-hmm. If you're not the lead boat, which side did the leader come from? And probably 60 to 70% of the time, that's going to be the winning side to go back down on.
Right. Yeah. So just in this last couple of minutes, you guys, for our relatively new guys, you have given a couple of great points of things to pay attention to. One, if you're approaching the windward mark and you're on a 10-degree right shift, well, you want to try to, as soon as you go around the windward mark, do a jibe set, because you'll be gaining when you go down on port. Great. So we're kind of going to try to keep an eye on these and keep note of these as we go along here tonight. It's some great lessons. Let's see. I got a question here that says, Dan, go ahead and repeat that rule, what you just said about going upwind if you're approaching the windward mark and you're on a 10-degree right. So go ahead and talk about that real quick.
Well, in Carlisle, we get even bigger shifts than 10 degrees sometimes. And sometimes they happen right as you're getting there. You roll up where you feel the boat, and you end up overstood sometimes even. But if you know what's favored going upwind, those same numbers are going to react. They're going to react for you downwind. So if you know you're approaching the windward mark and you're on starboard tack and you're up 10 to 15 degrees from what you would say base would be of the beat, then it's a no-brainer to me to try to get on port jibe as soon as possible. Meaning turn the mark and go back kind of the way you came coming from, which would be left downwind or right upwind. Just because the wind shifted to the right enough that you're going to be going towards the leeward mark more. Now, the other thing to do as a skipper or one of the crew is once you get that maneuver done and you're going and you feel you're on the angle you like, somebody needs to look at the compass. Because
if you have one.
if you have one, but look at a compass and say, all right, I'm rolling here. This is where I like it. But now all of a sudden, if you had to come up 10 degrees in order to stay on that angle of wind, meaning either the angle the way the wind is approaching your boat from your spar fly or your telltales, you may want to jibe back because the wind may have shifted that 10 degrees to the right, made it want back to base. So maybe it's a good time to jibe back to starboard because then you're at least on base and maybe the wind is shifting back. If it's oscillating, it may be going back to the left upwind, which means you'd want to be on starboard down. All to make those angles to the leeward mark favorable to your numbers. Right.
Tighter.
I got something to add here because one of the best sailors I ever met was the coach at Tufts, Joe Duplin, who was a Starboat world champion, and the Tufts team sails at these little lakes called the Mystic Lakes, a suburb of Boston. And probably the only tactical advice Joe Duplin ever told the guys upwind, the team, be on the tack that's headed closest to the mark.
Yeah. Well, that's basically what we're
and for lake sailing, I'm just trying to keep it really simple because lake sailing can be really confusing. And these guys sailed on the most confusing little mud hole lake I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And they won nationals by just following that.
Absolutely.
And it works upwind and downwind.
Absolutely. One of the joys of growing up in a little small pond like we did is when the group of us used to go off to North Americans and Worlds and we tell people where we're from, you know, and the level of racing that we were able to compete at. One made me very proud as a small Midwestern, guy growing up in a small pond in the middle of nowhere. But it taught us so much about feeling a boat and wind shifts and the puffs and the variable winds. We sailed in light to medium air mostly, and occasionally we'd get in a heavy air. But boy, that was important that we were able to learn that feel.
One thing that it really did was it taught us how to shift gears. And I don't know if that's a subject you want to go into because it can be kind of complicated with changing sail shapes, but it's right at the core of your first question about feel. We wound up developing really fast clock speeds because there were so many variables that changed much more frequently than if you're in a sea breeze out on the coast somewhere. And that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, what do you got to say about that? How did you guys ever experience that when traveling the world racing?
Rick, it is true. People think St. Louis, what do you sail on the Mississippi River? And
right.
Well, some people did. I have, but not very often. But it's funny to tell people where you're from. Although, if you really sit back, and the three of us, and a lot of people on the call here probably know all these people, but the Fisher brothers and Greg and Matt and George, their father, they all grew up in Ohio, sailing lightnings or thistles on Buckeye Lake or all those little lakes in Ohio. Yep. And they're excellent sailors. And not only them, but Skip D-Ball is one of the big names in sailing now. And they're really Midwest sailors. Now, Skip probably got out on a bigger lake from time to time, being in Toledo and Lake St. Clair. But I think that shows that I think small boat racing and ultimately back in the day, we sailed a ton on Lake Carlisle when we were younger. It was 3 races a day every Sunday. And, I know I did a lot of Saturday stuff, but we didn't miss a weekend back in the day.
Well, we got our 10,000 hours in fairly early in life.
Yes.
As a result.
Yeah.
Sailing for sure.
For sailing. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dan, you just mentioned the Fisher brothers, and Greg, are you here? Greg?
I am. Rick, how are you guys doing?
Fisher.
Hey, Greg.
Greg,
how you doing, buddy?
Hey there.
Well, let me spend a minute and introduce Greg Fisher. For those of you who don't know Greg, Dan, Matt, and I, as close of friends as we are, because we're local, when we travel the nation and travel the world, we get to know very special people. And Greg Fisher is a multi-world champion, North American champion, sailmaker. I think you were involved in the U.S. Olympic team for a while, Greg, and so welcome and say hi to CSA.
Well, thanks, Rick. Thanks for inviting me to join you guys tonight. And it's great to see you. It's so cool you guys are doing this. And but you know, it's fun. I've had so much fun at Carlisle there, and you guys are the epitome of what a One Design sailing club is all about. I think I've sailed a Snipe Nationals, a Snipe North Americans, 2 Flying Scott North Americans, 2 CSEs, Lightning North Americans, all that with you guys. And what a great, and every one of them has been great sailing and super fun. So, and I sailed a CSEs with Dan and Toby in the Lightning at Carlisle. And
let me ask you this, Greg. Was that the coldest you've ever been?
pretty close, pretty close.
Yeah.
Oh,
But I got to tell you, so I hadn't sailed a Lightning in a while, and Dan and Toby had just come off, I think, winning a Worlds with my brother. So they were on fire, and I was barely lit, if you know what I mean. And after the first weather leg, Dan turned around and he said, "You okay back there?" It was fun. But we've had some great times, as Rick mentioned. He and I sailed with my dad. And anyway, I see a lot of familiar faces. You guys have a great program there, and it's fun to be here with you tonight. So thanks for inviting me, Rick.
Well, you know, Greg, it was that North Sail thing you guys did a week ago that I signed into and watched, and that gave me the idea. Let's do this for our club because we're all somewhat homebound right now. And I thought it was a great thing what you guys did with you and Brian. And you have so much background in teaching, don't you? And you're currently, are you still at Charleston?
No, I left North Sails and went to be the sailing director at the College of Charleston.
Great.
For 8 years. And then you're right, I left and went to become the COO of the U.S. Sailing Olympic team for about 14 months. And I resigned. And now my deal is just coaching. Obviously, my deal now is kind of sitting around. Have you guys watched Tiger King? I mean, I'm just telling you, that's pretty good. But that is what I'm doing now is focusing on coaching, and I love it. You're right. That's what I've enjoyed the most.
Well, we decided to get this group together as we've all kind of, shot about our stories and where we've sailed together forever. And our history is we began producing training videos back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And then, the greatest memory, and one of the greatest, is sailing with your dad at that Worlds in 2003. And the night that we all got to shore and we were actually winning, and just your dad at that party that night, the people walking up to him, and he was what, like in his early 70s then? Yeah. And so it's a great memory that we all share. But
well, Rick, I saw him the next morning at breakfast. He didn't look so good.
I think then he turned out to be 88 after that, Matt. But no, that was fun.
That was so great, Greg. Great memory of your dad and sailing with you. So Greg, we're just going to start moving into a conversation talking about some racing when we were all getting involved in racing and some things we all concentrated on. And specifically, as an example, is if we were going, it's Monday now, and if we were going for our club race this coming Saturday, why don't we all talk a little bit about how would you guys start preparing, both in your mind and dealing with your crews, and what you would do to kind of get your mind focused around going out and winning races on Saturday. And Matt, why don't we start with you?
Well, the first thing I do is I'm a weather junkie, and there's nothing more exciting than watching the Weather Channel for a whole day. You just got to do it to believe it. At Monday or Tuesday, I'll start looking at what conditions might be like. And the bigger reason I do that is all about mental imagery. I always try to visualize what the day is going to be like. And, sports psychologists do this a lot because it's a performance aid. When you think about pulling off a perfect roll tack, your body's all ready to do it. And it makes it easier when the time comes, for example. But I'll start by looking at the weather and sort of imagining what the day is going to be like. Now, at Carlisle, the weather changes pretty quickly. Sometimes it's nothing like what I imagined. And that can be just a fun learning experience. But I'll start on Monday or Tuesday, kind of looking at the weather. I actually thought that before Illinois got locked down, that Patrick and I were going to be able to take my 470 out and launch it at the dam site this Saturday or Sunday. And then today we learned they're arresting people, so we're not going to do that. But I was already sort of imagining what that was going to look like and feel like, and that's kind of the mode that I get into. It's probably more than just mildly obsessive compulsive.
Gotcha.
As a correction of that, Matt, the public ramps are open still up there. I just saw that today.
Oh,
West Access and all the public ramps outside of the park are open.
Yeah.
And usable. So just
I was told I was told that they're arresting people who are over there who aren't hunters, trying to catch or kill their own food.
Oh,
So maybe I need to do more research and still go sailing.
well, once it warms up again, give it another week. It got cold. It's just got cold lately.
oh yeah. So Greg, as Dan talked about, he actually mentioned you as a guy from Buckeye in Ohio. And so small lake, right? So talk a little about your development and how you prepare for racing coming up on the weekend on a local level.
Yeah, I caught that. I caught Dan's inflection on Ohio. But it's the cool thing about our sport is there's always something new to learn. And it's interesting when I got back into college sailing, I guess, and I became the director, and I did a lot of coaching then, which I loved, of course. I learned what was most important in college sailing, and in college sailing, which is sailing in, people like to say, dumbed down little boats, but I think what it does is it brings it right back to the basics. But a weather leg might be 4 minutes long, and the whole race might be 12 minutes long or 15 minutes long. And, we thought it's all about starting, it's all about tactics, but you know what it's all about is boat speed. If you're fast, if you can get off the line and you start in the middle of the line and you kind of protect and are conservative, you're going to do really well. You might not win the races every time, but you're going to be consistent. So I've kind of switched my focus on what I think is really most important. And speed to me is really important. I've been able to do some coaching this winter with some J70 guys and all that. And we spent a bunch of time working on speed. And I don't mean like speed, like you go out and you fare the bottom of your boat and you tweak and tune it and all that. But it's more making sure that you've gotten comfortable. And Dan, I heard you mention gear changing, and Matt, you mentioned gear changing and practicing. We'll practice our boat handling. We'll practice, maybe our starting if we can get some buddies out there to do it with us. But I think practicing our boat speed is really important. And having a friend go out and speed test, if you will, and change gears so you get really comfortable with that makes a huge difference. Because when you're confident in your speed, then you check that box and then you can focus on, like Matt said, looking at the weather, looking at the wind shifts, making sure you get off the starting line and protecting, the boats you're trying to cover and all that stuff. But I think when we're fast, and I don't necessarily mean faster than everybody else, but never slower, we're going to be much more competitive. That's interesting. I've seen that in so many different, I guess you'd say, walks of sailing this past 10 years.
Well, let me coattail on that, Greg, because I remember you kind of introducing that terminology 20 years ago when we produced those lightning videos, the term of gear changing. And somebody wrote us a comment, if you could talk a little bit more describing and defining gear changing.
Well, now we're until midnight. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Not a short subject.
1 minute, Greg.
Does everybody have a cup of coffee or a drink or whatever? But, I think when we're talking gear changing, it's being comfortable that when we hit a bunch of motorboat waves or somebody tacks on us or we're trying to accelerate off the starting line, we have a comfort level in knowing where we ought to have the main, where we ought to have the jib, kind of what our backstay, if we're sailing a lightning with a backstay, if we're sailing a snipe, where the vang is, to make the boat accelerate. We're in this gear to accelerate. Okay, now we're up to speed. Now we've got somebody that maybe is right on our weather hip. How are we going to get up to them because we know we want to go to the right. We want to make them tack. So we want to pinch. So now we got to go into a point mode. And it's just kind of having a comfort level in being able to put your boat in those gears and not have to think about it, you know? I mean, when I say not have to think about it, of course, we're going to think, I've got to go high here, so I've got to make these changes. But having that come second knowledge, or whatever you want, however you want to put it, is really important. And I think to get comfortable with that, it takes practice and really, you know, not necessarily the tuning part of it, but more just the practice of going through the gear changing.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we've taken the step where we're a couple of days away from heading out to the lake and we're getting ready to sail. But on race day, Dan, why don't you talk about how do you get your boat, whether it's the bottom of your boat, getting it, make sure it's clean, your sails are in great shape, and prepping your boat for a day of racing. Dan, can you talk about that a little bit?
I do. I can talk about that. But just to dovetail a little bit on what Greg just said on the gear changing and kind of what to do, a lot of that gear changing is like when motorboat shop, let's say you are speed testing with a friend, but maybe motorboat shop comes. Don't just blow that motorboat shop off. Say, all right, let's see who's going to be faster through this motorboat shop. You know, it's a matter of ease the jib an inch, ease the main 2 inches, put the bow down, not 5 degrees, but maybe 2.5 degrees, and
Sure.
really get the boat charged up and getting back up to speed. You know, and that happens all the time on a small lake. You know, or somebody tacks on, or you got to come out of a tack. You got to leave those sails out a little bit until you get up to speed, and then bring them back into where you're back in what you would say point mode. But getting back to what you started me on, bottom stuff, I think that's
go into more detail about that, bottom and your sails and your tuning.
The boat itself, you want to have be able to rely that your boat is not going to break down in an event. We've all had it happen, and it sucks. But and it will happen because you miss stuff. But you need to just double, triples check everything, even in between races. Just kind of look at ringy dings on the main sheet block, or you know, because those things start working out, and we've all caught them before. And it's just as you're talking with your friends on the boat, just always continue to look at things in the boat and double check that. As far as the bottom goes, you can't have you have to have a good surface on the bottom.
Yeah.
Keep it clean.
Sure.
Try to keep it, I hate to use the word waxed. We all got off of wax, I think, years ago.
Yeah.
And I think
Not the Brazilians.
Greg, I turned Greg's brother on Matt onto the reject stuff, which is more of a chemical thing that just doesn't let the water penetrate. I think you need to do that pretty often for big events, maybe 2-3 times a year if you're just sailing fleet races.
Yeah.
You know, it takes effort. You got to get the boat very clean and then get that surface where it's smooth all the time.
Yeah.
And then you can rely on that. And I think certain other boats, the centerboard, the rudders, I think Flying Scots are different from Lightnings as far as how you prepare and keep that centerboard from wiggling too much, or for lack of a better word. But you want to keep even that centerboard surface clean and ready to go through the water and keep that water flow.
Yeah.
That's important. And sales, all I would say is this, is I'm no longer selling sails for anybody. And as Greg really isn't either. But I would say for a big event, your sales can't be new enough. I hate to say it. I sound like a salesman doing it, but but to that, I think depending on what your goal is going in. My son's sort of in the business now, doing a lot of coaching, sailing on boats with people, and he gets what I call newbies in the J70 fleets too. But I think what they do is they try to figure out what's their goal for this maybe winter season, sailing all the Davis Island stuff, and you know, what's the realistic goal for this team? And when they've only been sailing the boat for 6 months, the realistic goal is, hey, maybe at the beginning we're going to be, you know, maybe we'll be 2/3 from the bottom, you know, or maybe at the end of the winter season they're shooting to try to be right at the midway point. Now maybe those guys don't need fresh sails, you know, because they're contending in the top 5. So that said, I don't think you need to spend crazy amounts of money on sales, but I think when you get to a point when you're going for it and you feel you're a perennial top 10, I think you need to have your sales right.
Yeah.
One of the things that you can do, and Dan, you and I did this for years, was that we would sail in the fleet with a purposely old suit of sails because it would force us to do everything else perfectly to be competitive. And what it really does is it develops your work habits, your footwork, your body motions. Everything is as good as it can get, but you're still using 3 or 4, or heck, you and I use sails that were older than that. And it allowed us to be racing boat to boat, and then we'd go to a big regatta and pull the fast ones out that hadn't seen the sunlight before, put them on, and then with the same work habits, we would be more than 1 notch faster and in contention.
Because fleet racing, you have to work hard to get those sails around the course, right?
Exactly, and it develops a work habit on board your boat that you have to do everything just right to be able to be in the hunt, and it's not a bad thing. It also makes you really hungry, which is not a bad thing either.
Hey, Greg, I'll bring you into this. I remember a long time ago somewhere, I don't know where we were, but we were somewhere where somebody had their spinnaker and they were drying it, and the spinnaker was just flapping away out there. And I remember you making a comment, something about $ flying off that thing. It's like that spinnaker. Talk a little bit about that, Greg, and taking care of your sails, because you're the real professional sailmaker here. So talk about caring for your sails.
Well, I don't think it necessarily has to be like a sailmaker type point of view, but your sails are your engine. And as Matt and Dan pointed out, they really do make a difference. And as Dan said, you almost can't have new enough sails. And certainly, that can be exaggerated a little bit, but not much, because I think it is really important to have, when we want to really be competitive, that's a box we can check. But you're right, Rick, when you let a spinnaker luff, it does beat it up. There's filler, there's resin in the weave and this day and age sailcloth. And when it luffs back and forth, the resin breaks down, the cloth gets stretchy, and it's just not as fast anymore. So when we come to the dock, if we leave our jib up, like we used to do so much on snipes, if we leave our jib up and it luffs, it's just breaking it down way faster than it needs to be. So taking care of it. I got to tell you, I live in South Carolina now, where we have to hose down our sails all the time. And I miss the days where you didn't have to do that all the time when we were in fresh water. But if you end up sailing in salt water, that's really, really important.
Yeah. Okay. So lesson learned here is, at the end of the day, when your boat's on the trailer, don't hoist your spinnaker up and dry it, just flapping in the wind. No more of that. I don't want to see that at CSA anymore, right?
Yeah.
All right.
You can lay it out in the cockpit, or lay it on the grass and then fold it up later. I mean, there's a lot of ways to dry it off if you want, or put it away wet and get a new one next year.
Okay. So guys, we've gone through, we've prepped our minds, we've prepped our bodies, we've prepped our boat. We're sailing out to the race course, and we're 5 minutes before the start. Now, let me back up. We're 15 minutes before the start. What do you guys all do? What do you do to gain an edge? Dan, why don't we start with you?
Well, as far as sailing off the race course, I think you're trying to monitor. You try to get a wind reading as far as, do a head to wind, if you will, to see what the number is. Really, right after you got out of the harbor mouth, as far as you try to clear the land as best you will, or get as close to the sailing area you're going to be. Just get a wind shot and know where the wind's coming from, and then sail for a while, and then always watching the puffs, and maybe get a wind shot in a puff, because maybe you'll see, like, hey, every time the puff is here and I get a wind shot, a head to wind, that's when you use your compass. You go directly head to wind, and you check your compass. Maybe the puff is always 5 or 10 degrees to the right or the left. So you kind of keep that in your head, or write it down. A lot of people make the notes on the boat or up on a notepad. You know, and just kind of do that for a half an hour before the start, just to kind of get an idea of what the oscillation is if you're on a lake. Sometimes if you're you know, in sea breezes and stuff, there's not oscillations, and those get a little tougher to see where things are. But that's one of the things I look at as far as conditions go. And then you want to try to sail a boat upwind a little bit and try to see what gears you're going to be in for that particular race coming up. You know, where the backstay might be, or where the Cunningham and Bang, depending on the type of boat you're on. Kind of just see what your setup's going to be when you do start. So you know when you start, you're going to be in a fast mode, if you will. You know, if you can get with a friend or even one of the guys in the fleet that you know is fast, try to go upwind with them if you have the timing where you can kind of get with them and see if you're matching speed with them. I think, you know, that gives you confidence that, hey, I'm hanging with Larry today or somebody, and you'll have confidence maybe when you come off the line that way.
So Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about what Dan just talked about, how the importance of, you can go out all day sailing by yourself and believe that your sail trim is right, your tune is right, your crew work is right. But until you get boat to boat, you know, you're really not going to get the full picture of how you're doing. So talk a little bit about going out and maybe finding a buddy that you guys can just do some upwind work before a race starts, or even out on a Sunday when you're not doing anything.
Well, I actually do it a little bit differently than that, because sometimes I don't want anybody to poach an idea off of me.
Not very nice, Matt.
What's that?
It's not very nice.
Well, no, but let me tell you what I do instead that still helps. Whenever we're going out, we always try to be going as fast as if we were racing. And that kind of plays into the work habits, always doing it the same way, always working to go as fast as you can. It doesn't sound very relaxing, but actually, think about how much time you spend on the water compared to how long the race is. You know, maybe you spend 2 times as much time on the water as race time. So if you're practicing going as fast as you can in those other times, you're actually getting a lot more speed time in. And when I kind of look at what my strengths are, when I sailed more, I was a better tactician. And then I sort of evolved into just a really fast skipper, mainly because I had Dan as a tactician, which was a huge advantage.
Sure.
But if you practice going fast all the time, it's one of those little dividends that pays when you're not really paying attention sometimes. So what I do on the way out is I'm always talking to the crew. What do you see? Exactly what Dan said. Let's take a wind shot here. Let's figure out what we think might be the pattern. It's saved us a couple times in predictable venues like San Diego, where, you know, if it's starting at 290, it's supposed to come back to 270, but it doesn't, then you know it's going to, you know, get all the way to 310. So it actually kind of tells you what your first beat strategy should probably be. Be paying attention the whole time. We're out there because it's fun. So you don't really want to be asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, real quick, address, you just mentioned something about taking a wind shot, going head to wind. Real quick, I got a question about that. So address that real quick.
Well, what I do, it's a data point. The more data points you have, the greater the odds are that you'll have a complete picture of what might happen. If there's a pattern, you'll see it. I go head to wind, let the jib luff, and when it's roughly breaking down the sail shape, Greg, sorry, when it's roughly breaking right in the middle, you read what the compass is, and that's your wind shot. That tells you what the wind is at that moment.
Right.
And it can vary on the way out compared to when you're at the starting line because of topography or what the land is doing. Yeah. And you kind of form a picture. It's a really cool sport because we play at the medium of 2 fluids. One is non-compressible and we float on it, but the other flows and compresses and moves and spins, and you can't see it, and that's the wind. So you need as many data points as you can to kind of figure out how you're going to use all this to your advantage. And, you know, that might sound like voodoo or mumbo jumbo, but that's the physics behind it. Then when you figure out the physics, then other things like kinetics and other things where you can put energy into the situation can make a difference. But that's not what you asked about.
I don't know. That's okay. That's cool. That's it. We're just having fun here, Matt. We're just living
We
the,
are.
living the dream here at home with our pals.
We're safe.
They're safe. So, interesting point about Dan. I remember a memory that I have from sailing with with Matt at the 98 North Americans is it was a breezy regatta. And I remember Fisher had a real focus on the first minute after the start. How important the first minute was. And why is that? Dan, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Greg.
Right.
The first minute after the starting gun goes.
Well, I remember in 98, you and I sailed with Matt, Greg, brother. I'm not going to say older or younger, but
Older.
I'm not going. So we did sail. We did a districts with him in Ohio, and then we went on to the North Americans, which Rick and I crewed with Matt, and we won the North Americans in 98, which was really neat because we kind of all jumped in the boat just that summer.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've always done crewing with different people in the lightning class is just trying to pick their brains. Why are they that good? And, I was very excited to sail with Matt to see what it was. And a lot of it is the intensity of what he puts into a sailboat race. I think the paying attention to really getting into what's happening at the time. And I think what you and I learned is, and what he taught us very early was, if it's blowing, let's get off the line, get a good start, which he was a very good starter.
Yeah.
And he's like, look, the first 1/3 of this beat, you said a minute or two.
Yeah.
I think he really means the first half of the first beat.
Yeah.
If we lay it out there, like hiking hard, doing everything the best we can, like harder than the next guy, because it's so important because you're all starting even. And it's all about getting into that top 5 or 10 boats at the weather mark. Mm-hmm. And I think concentrating hard, working hard is and from that day on, and I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah. Toby and I talk about it too, is that's something I've always talked about, even on boats that I'm driving or whatever. It's like, I taught that to my son. You have to work hard those first 3 to 5 minutes after the start. Right. Now, after that, you start getting, if you're in this right shift and you're going to be in that top group. Right. And you just start relaxing and resting your body a little bit. But those first few minutes, you need to lay it all out there. Yeah. And I think one of the other things to dovetail on that is what I learned from Matt Fisher, is once you figure out what side of the line you want to start on, maybe the pin's favored, he would never venture all the way down to that pin. And that's something that I always try to do. I was a younger guy, like, the pin's favored, I'm going to win that pin.
Right.
And what Matt taught me sailing with him that always rings home is, look how many guys are down there. He goes, I'm going to start 1/3 of the way from the pin and get a good clean start, have a good lane to drive in. He goes, there's going to be 1 or 2 boats that come out of that pin. Right. The rest of them are going to get buried. Yep. So he would move himself up the line. We'd be on the pin half or even the pin 1/3, but not all the way down to that pin. Because he would say, those 2 boats that beat us off the pin, we'll grind them down later. He felt we would just work harder later and get them later. And over the course of an event, I think that was right. It lended itself to the consistency of what you needed to do. And if you remember, we won that North Americans by a lot of points, but we never won a race.
That's right.
We never won one race, but we won by, I can't remember anymore. It was almost double-digit points we won by. Yeah. But we were just very consistent in the top 8, I believe, in every race.
That's right. Dan and I and Matt, we talk sailing all the time. And I want to bring this point to you that in this conversation, the key things to remember, just maybe a half a dozen things you're going to take from this conversation. Dan and I, before this tonight, we never discussed that regatta going into tonight. And it's interesting that, Dan, you and I both took so much of that one lesson, maybe not one, but you know what I'm saying. Right. No. You and I did not talk about this before tonight.
No, that was embedded in our brains after that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool, you guys, for some of you newer sailors to pick off with these really, really top-notch sailors you're hearing from tonight, just some of these key points to apply to your racing motif and your DNA. So.
And I think I don't know if Greg was here when we started talking about it earlier, but I think from 25 years ago till now, I think people are more open they're more open books. There were a lot of older guys that wouldn't tell you a thing about why they were going so fast back in the day. But I think the good guys in most fleets, or even at local regattas, say you're just at the local Flying Scott regatta, and the guys that are winning those events, they're very open to tell new people kind of what's going on, or maybe they'll even invite you to come sail with them, maybe in a fleet race at their club. And I would take them up on that, because I think you can learn a lot. Like Ben and Debbie Williams are in the Midwest. I think people could learn a lot in a Flying Scott from them. If Ben, you'd say, hey, let's switch up crew. I'll crew for you and see what you're doing, or maybe you'll come down and crew for me one day, or we'll switch off races. We do 2 races. There's a ton to be learned that way.
Yeah. And, Greg, bringing you into the conversation. So, in knowing you for so many decades here, and the sailmaker you were, and the compliments that so many people around the country talked about, one of the greatest attributes that you brought to our sport was how open you were. You were a perennial, contender for North Americans in a world, yet I heard from so many people that you were so open to people coming to you and talking to you and asking you questions, which was a great attribute, is why I personally believe you're a great human being, my friend. So Greg, after the first third or a half of a windward mark, and as Matt taught us to grind, let's everything you have the first 2, 3, 4 minutes, let's get in that top group. So talk a little about the importance of getting into that top group, and then when you are in that top group leading towards the windward mark, talk a little bit about that.
Well, thanks, Rick. And I think what Matt and Dan have said here really all comes together. And and as Matt pointed out, you're going to check the wind so you have a good idea what the breeze is doing. And certainly it's hard to tell, especially on an inland lake like we have in Ohio and at Carlisle, exactly what's going on, except you have an idea of the phases back and forth. And like Dan pointed out, even if an end of the line is favored, it can be really dangerous to start closer to that end. Because if you start at the leeward end of the line, let's face it, you're going to sail the left side of the course. If you're going to start at the weather end of the line, you're going to sail the right side of the course. Whether you want to be there or not, that's where you're going to be forced. So I think unless it's a huge favor, or we see breeze on the left or the right, or current or whatever, we would start near the middle. And then going back to what you guys are saying, why we would try to sail so fast in the beginning is so that we can take that first shift. And if you're in that first group, that when the shift comes, you're able to tack, then that puts you in the ball game in my mind. And I think going back to what Dan said, that my brother Matt would say, is that when you have confidence in your speed, then you don't have to risk it. Then you can be very conservative. Then you can start in the middle. Then you can hit that first shift, knowing that there might be a boat on the right or the left that nailed you because they kind of shot that corner. But then we can hang in there. And like in college sailing in a fleet of 20 boats, if our guys would round in the top 8, that was huge. Because then if they're fast, they're going to grind them down. And if they finish in the top 5 in a 20 race regatta, they'll win. So it goes back to the conservative part, Rick, if I could say that. If you could hit the first shift, then we would look as where the biggest mass of boats are, and we'd kind of protect them. Meaning we would try not to let them get a lot of, people call it leverage, where they get out to the edge away from us so that we can't protect them. And if there were 10 boats to the right and 2 boats to the left, even if it was Dan and Matt, well, okay, maybe not if it was Dan and Matt, but if it was somebody else, we would protect the mass, knowing that that's where we could get hurt the most. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? To try to be conservative if we've been able to get off the line. We're going fast enough to be able to hit their first shift. That's what we kind of look for. If that makes sense. Dan, Matt, does that make sense to you guys?
Oh, it makes a ton of sense because it's the technique by which you put together a good series score. You know, it's a different thing when you're racing against 60 boats than when you're racing against 10 at Carlisle or in Ohio or somewhere. You know, it's a numbers game, and the biggest thing is to manage your risk. And really, that means you've got to know what the risks are. So protect the 10 and give up the 2. Do that all day long, you know, for sure.
Yeah. So I have a question here from our group that says, how do you decide which side of the first leg to go to? And what do you do to get back if you're forced to the wrong side?
Well, I'll take that one. I'm a huge proponent of get to the first shift first, because when you get there, then you've got the choice of whether to stay or to tack. So it's like the opportunity cost. So it echoes everything about hiking hard in the first 3 to 5 minutes, whatever it takes to get to the first shift first, because then you get to choose. Pick the side that looks darker, go for more wind. And, you know, and that's in the absence of any other knowledge. So that's one approach, and that can work pretty well with lake sailing as long as you don't get too extreme, which we've all talked about. That's how I do it.
Well, let's get all 3 of you guys to chime in on this one, because this is pretty important, because we know it's happened to all of us where we attempt to find what's the favorite side, and there are many times, especially in lake sailing, where we hit that wrong. So Dan, what's your take on this?
Right. Well, you know, yeah, you do get it wrong. I mean, that's the fun thing about, that's not the fun thing about sailing, but I mean, you do pick wrong sometimes, and you end up, for whatever reason, you're on the wrong side of the shift, a big right shift or a big left shift, and you're on the wrong side of it. I think you need to pick your time to try to climb back the best you can, to try to minimize how bad it was or is. Sometimes it's waiting where you're at, or, you know, because maybe the shift is so big that you need to wait it out. But then as soon as you see a shift to your advantage, where maybe a header on the tack that you're on, that might be, okay, now let's go and probe maybe and see if it is shifting back our way a little bit. But in those situations, I mean, it's tough. I mean, you got to keep going fast, and you can't get down, and you got to keep looking for opportunities. Mm-hmm. I think when you do see a shift and you start probing over, you know, you need to bite the bullet and just get back. I don't. Greg may be like, just get back as early as possible as soon as you decide it's wrong. I don't know. But those are the hardest times on the water when it really goes sour.
I think
but you got to know the first leg. If it's the first leg, that there's still time to climb back. Yeah. There's a run and another beat, and so you really need to keep your confidence up and your boat speed going, because you will climb back. And in a series, you're trying to get that number as low as possible. Whether it's a get back to just a 10 could be a keeper in a lot of regattas.
Yeah. So Greg, doesn't this go along with, you know, you do hit the wrong shift and you are on the wrong side, but gosh, if you're fast, right, your chances of getting back into this is pretty good.
Yeah. Well, you know, going to what Dan said there, you know, we all know the old adage, you can't win a race in that first leg, but you sure as heck can lose it. You know what I mean? If you really blow it. And I think, you know, when we come out of that start and hopefully we've had a decent start, hopefully we're moving well, hopefully we're in a very conservative place in that middle third of the line. And let's say the group's approaching us from the left, which is our first decision, you know, are we going to tack underneath them, or are we going to sail either through them or duck them and go on the other side? That's the first decision. And I think that's where we have to kind of be a little bit confident and say, like Dan said, or Matt said, I think there's breeze on the left. We want to sail through and get that breeze. Yeah. It would be unusual for me to have that kind of guts, to be honest with you. I would probably tack underneath the group coming from the left and hopefully lead them back or sail underneath them to the group coming from the right and go underneath them and lead back. So we're kind of in the middle, knowing that that's real conservative, and somebody might say real dangerous, because if somebody works one side or the other, they're going to get a good piece of you, which is true. But going back to what Dan said, then you have the rest of the race to hopefully gain it back, or at least be in the top third. But we haven't damaged ourselves too badly, although we've all been there. But hopefully we haven't damaged ourselves too badly that first half of the beat.
Great.
Greg,
So-
we've got a name for what you just said, Greg. We call that the Carlisle shimmy. Left, right, left, right, left, right, round.
So it's great, you guys. We've addressed pre-race, we've addressed starting, we've addressed the first windward leg, and as Dan made mention to, okay, so you're not in the first third, you're not in the top group, and you're in the middle half, but you still have a lot of downwind legs to go. And whether you're no spinnaker or spinnaker, we round the windward mark, and how do we then, what happens in our minds and our thinking that, to one, if we're in the top group, stay in the top group, and if we're not in the top group, then what are our options to work our way back into the top group? And who wants to go with that? Matt?
Well, if we thanks, buddy. If we round, I want to make sure that we get a good rounding going the way that we think has got the darkest water, frankly.
Okay.
And I'm coloring my thoughts here with Carlisle specifically in mind. There's a lot of opportunity off the wind because it's a shifty lake. So again, try to be in the darkest water that you can find with the best velocity made good that you can. And what that means is be headed closest to the mark. That keeps you conservative, to Greg's point, because downwind tactics, you have to manage the risk just like you do upwind. My own personal style is I'm usually a little more aggressive off the wind. And I don't know whether that's because I'm trying to catch the front group or, for whatever reason, that just sort of seems to be my style a little bit more of late.
Okay.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I kind of find that my style evolves too over time. Some of that's got to do with who's on board with me, and some of it doesn't. More often than not, it's dictated by the conditions.
Okay. So, Greg, question for you. How do you, some techniques about finding what's the right angle to head downwind? We can go left, we can go right, but how do we know?
Well, I think that's hard. I mean, and it's always
That's tough.
a judgment call. And I think, you know how upwind we watch the other boats to get an idea if we're in the right gear. Are we pinching too much? Are we footing too much? Is our speed versus height in a good place around the other boats? We're constantly, I think ideally we'd be constantly looking at other boats to make sure we're in the right gear. And if we get a puff, that allows us to sail a little deeper if we're going dead downwind, we'd want to try to burn that up and take advantage of it. Or if we get in a lull, we want to go a little bit higher. But I think it's really unusual, except for those exceptions, where when you're around the top mark, you'd want to jibe right away. Because we have boats that are on the starboard ley line or they're on the offset or whatever, so we'd want to bear away and perhaps try to make sure that we have really clear air on the boats behind us, and that we've left an opportunity for us to jibe, which means we come around and we don't sail too high and allow boats to get down below us, but we've rounded, put ourselves in a good spot so we're maybe a little bit below the boats above us, but we're ahead of them so that we can jibe if we want to. But then we'd wait and let somebody else make the first move. That's the way I would try to do it, because I'm not gutsy enough to make that first shot unless we absolutely see huge breeze on the other side or whatever. But, hopefully we're trying to be very conservative and look for the breeze, like Matt said, and make that move once it's quite clear. what seems to be the side that's advantaged.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, why don't we bring you in? As I remember back to the times that I sailed with you, Matt, the downwind, the technique that you have in a lightning specifically, that
Yeah.
we always gain boats as you as the spinnaker trimmer. So for some of the newer sailors here, not anything specific to get too deep into specific, but just talk a little bit about your trimming techniques and how you communicate back and forth with the skipper about that option called feel, because you two have to work together, right?
Right. So yeah, I don't know where they go downwind because all I'm doing is trimming the spinnaker.
Right.
Because I'm looking up at that spinnaker curl. But as far as yeah, I mean, you either be conservative or go for that puff. I mean, I think that's is smart. But as far as the spinnaker trimming and the communication has to go on to the skipper is important, because the skipper's trying to get low. Like if it's Greg trying to stay low so we can execute a jibe. If he sees something or feels a shift, we want to be on port. We need to be able to clear the boats from behind, so we want to almost be lower. So being lower and faster is what you want to be, almost in any boat. I know there's a lot of people on here that ACAT sailors, Flying Scot sailors, Lightning sailors, snipe sailors. I mean, I think low and fast is what you want to be downwind.
Sure.
So that does take concentration to know on the spinnaker feel. And from driving a Lightning and trimming a lot of spinnaker, I kind of know what they want to hear. And it's like, look, I don't have any air in the spinnaker. So they'll usually tip the bow up or come up into the wind a little bit to give that spinnaker a little punch. So I need to give that communication. Or we get a little puff that maybe nobody talked about. The front person and the skipper didn't talk about it. I say, hey, it feels like I got extra pressure here. We should be able to press down a little bit now. And just a constant communication. And I'm listening to what they're saying too. And trying to paint a picture in my own head of where the boats are behind us, and or what our next move might be. But a lot of it is, for me as a trimmer, is concentration. I mean, you can't look away. That because that little extra. It's always a game of inches, every sport, and sailing is not different.
That's right. And what happens every time you look away from your spinnaker? What happens? It collapses, right?
No, I pull the board up and it gets him in the back of the legs.
Right. And Greg's brother Matt knew for some reason when I looked away, even if it was just moving I don't know how I did it, but maybe he was watching my eyes and Toby's glasses or something.
Hey, Rick, could I say something? Just it's interesting. I was really fortunate to sail with, like I said, Dan and Toby at the CSCs at Carlisle and Lightnings a number of years ago. And I was amazed and impressed, and I don't think I've ever had anybody be quite in tune with the communication with the driver like Dan was. When we'd get a lull, Dan wouldn't say, boy, we got a lull. Dan would say, I need a little heat here, which would mean you got to head up. Yeah. And when he'd get pressure, or, when he'd get some breeze and he'd feel a little tug on the spinnaker sheet, he'd say, you can take it down. Or if it was really good, he could say, you do what you want. I got it all here now. But it was interesting. It wasn't like every once in a while, it was constant. And it wasn't like we were just cruising down the leg, waiting to jibe. We were all over the place and Dan was driving the bus. Dan would say, I need heat. I need you to go higher. Now you can take it down. And it just was amazing, that kind of communication and what that meant to the speed.
From a skipper's point of view, we spent a lot of time looking at the back of Dan's head. We called it autopilot.
Right.
Because he was driving the boat.
Yeah. Isn't that part of developing a good team, that you do develop, that have that autopilot, whether you're a 2-person Flying Scot, 4-person E-Scout, that you develop a confidence that all of the individual crew members know their skill sets. And the reason for that is because of that autopilot deal, right, Matt?
I think so. And it really, so much of this is time in the boat.
Sure.
And, Dan's already declared how much time he and Toby spend in boats.
Right.
And by the time that the three of us were sailing together, I wasn't spending that much time in the boat. So the way that I would prepare would be physically preparing myself, but then just relying on the fact that they were a set unit that knew how to do everything. And it made it very easy for me to kind of adapt to their crewing style as much as they were adapting to my skippering style.
Yeah. So you guys, this is, we're going to kind of start to wrap this up now. And we've talked about the process of becoming better boat racers and pre-start and start and windward leg and down rig. And Greg, you as a coach, the race is over, whether it's a race or an event or regatta. Talk a little bit about the debrief. And I know I've read enough of your stuff to talk about how important that is, whether it's right after you cross the finish line, you guys have had a little water, had a little protein, and either on the sail in or back at the dock or at the beer keg afterwards, the importance of debriefing with your crew and your team about what you learned and how to apply that to the next event. So can you talk about that, Greg?
Well, yeah, I think that's crucial, is that you try to leave the day on a positive note. And it's not always easy to do that. And as you know, Rick, I'm not always that guy. And it's hard sometimes. You really, sometimes you don't have a great day and you're not super happy about it. But what I kind of learned as a coach is that you try to do the praise sandwich. Boy, you really look good today, but wow, were we slow? But we had fun, didn't we? That kind of, but yeah, you really need to have that kind of mindset going into it. And it's funny, Joanne and I, my wife and I, had one of the kids that graduated from the college sail with us and 3 or 4 Lightning North Americans after he graduated. And he was the one that carried the ball for us emotionally. If we had a rough one, he would be the one that would play back what we did for years at the College of Charleston. It was really interesting. And he was the one that would say, you know what, we really were pretty speedy. And then he'd say, we weren't very smart, but here's what we could have done better, and it was, right. But I think playing that out and then keeping a sense of humor as best you can is important. And
stay humble, right, Greg? Because
stay humble.
Oh my God, you could be the world champion in one weekend and go out 6 months later for North Americans and have your ass handed to you.
Yes.
You have to stay humble, right? Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about that, the ups and downs?
Well, are you trying to imply how many times I've had my ass handed to me?
Okay.
More than my fair share, let me tell you. Yeah, I tend to I have favorite venues. Mm-hmm. So 9 or 10 months ahead of time, if I know I'm going to go to one of my favorite venues, I'm already excited. I'm already in my happy place. I'm already thinking about the moves we're going to do and what the conditions are going to be like. I'm already sailing the event in my head every once in a while, or when I work out in the morning, or whatever it is. Yeah. Correspondingly, there's some venues that I don't really like that much, and then it becomes more of a praise sandwich type challenge.
Yeah.
But I'm an optimist. I always look for opportunities to learn or have fun, and
sure.
Sometimes it doesn't bounce your way, and something that just gets you closer to the day that it will.
Right. Absolutely. So let's start to wrap this up, and what you kind of took from this, Dan, we'll start with you, as to how all this can apply to some of the newer and mid-level racers here, and maybe address a couple of points that we've discussed today and moving forward. And Dan, we'll start with you. What do you think?
I think I'm not sure on the whole. I can't see the whole picture of everybody's here, and I hope we didn't talk over the head of too many. But I think if people want to ask questions at the end, I'm sure you'll maybe allow some of that.
Sure.
But I think the biggest thing about it is sailing is so much fun, and I've done it for so many decades that you need to have fun while you're out there. And I think the way to do that is try to set a goal for what you might think you can do with your team. That way, you're not, because I remember when I first started sailing, I was 16, 17, or you and I went with Lyle Burridge, Matt's father, down to the Southern Circuit for I went 4 years in a row, which was a very good time for sure. And there's Lyle there.
There he is. Yeah.
But we did not do very well at all. But I learned a lot. We were having a good time, and ultimately, I wasn't expecting to be in the top 10 anyway.
Yeah.
So I think if you go to a big event, set a goal for where you think you want to try to be, and if you exceed it, then you're happy. And
Sure.
if you meet it, you're happy. And if you didn't, then you need to rethink how you're gonna either come up with that goal next time or work harder at meeting that goal. So I think that's important, just to make sure you have fun with your team and really the whole fleet. I mean, everybody that I sail with in a lot of different types of boats, everybody's just a lot of fun there and having a good time most of the time. So.
Yeah. So Greg, how about your thoughts on, first of all, Greg, thanks for doing this. I only communicated with Greg about 3 hours ago about doing this. And Greg, just in my heart, I knew you would help with this. I knew you would, because you're just that kind of guy. So how about some wrap up thoughts from you, Greg? And then really quick, talk a little bit about what you're doing today with your Sail Greg Fisher deal. So real quick, just a big wrap up for us here.
Well, thanks, Rick. And it's funny, as you mentioned that, and I was thinking about it, and Dan said, you got to have fun. And so it's funny, I was with the Olympic program this past year and a half, and my job was not to do much with the team. I was the fundraising guy, and that wasn't really my bag, but I got to go to the Pan Am Games with the team.
Yeah.
And I had so much fun. It was cool because, obviously they are, shall we say, elite athletes.
Yeah.
But you know what? They're just like us, they got to have fun. And when they had a rough race, our job as coaches wasn't to go tell them how they blew it or what they needed to do better or how they were off on a 2-degree shift.
Yeah.
They needed to feel good about themselves so they could come back and do battle the next day. And just like Dan said, when they had a good day, it was to build up. Man, that was a ton of fun, you guys. It's all relative. And the more fun they had, and I got to be honest with you, I had a blast with them. I had a blast with the other 2 coaches that were there, and they got 7 out of 10 medals, and it just was a ton of fun. So I think what Dan said just really resonates. And, when our college team was on fire, it was because they were having a great time together as a team. Yes. And I just think that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. I don't, in racing with all 3 of you guys for 50 years, I have nothing of just positive memories about you guys as people and human beings, but just our times together. And we never all succeeded. We bombed tremendously, especially when we were younger and still learning this sport. All of us sailing with our dads, the beginning, the early days, we didn't win anything, but we tried to have fun. We learned, we soaked it in like sponges. We developed the feel, and here we are today, the greatest sport in the world. And what a family we all are still, decades and decades later. That the greatest sailing friends I have are some of the people right here I'm looking at right now. Some of my greatest friends. So we're going to wrap this up. And my hope is, Matt, you have something?
Well, I just wanted to put one tip out there.
Hit it.
We spend a lot of time looking at sail shape and talking about everything else. The one thing most people don't pay a lot of attention to is their centerboard, because it's always pulled up.
Yeah.
Or whatever foil you've got. There's some classes where all you do is pay attention to the foils and everything else is optional.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a little tip, especially if you put your boat in Carlisle when it's nice and warm, a couple weeks later, maybe you got a scum line on your board and you don't know it.
Sure.
Take a look at it and clean it. It's a little thing, and maybe you'll have a little bit more fun because you'll be going that little bit faster too.
Well, that leads into, I've taken a couple of bullet points here that just really quick, I'm going to wrap up. One was the whole option of preparing your hull and the importance of that. And as a lot of you know from CSA, when Buddy Melgus came down here about 20 years ago and talked to the Leukemia Cup group, and I had a chance privately to talk to him a little bit, and he pushed for me to read his book about his Olympic campaigns in the 70s and 80s. And he talked about dedicating an entire chapter on nothing but prepping the bottom of their boat. he felt it was such a big deal to do that. And so that's something to you guys should all take away, to don't just bring your boats after a day of sailing, put it on the trailer and walk away from it. Clean that boat off, feel that thing with your hand, check out your board, as Matt said. It's very, very important because of that little thing called drag. The other thing that was a bullet point is some speed testing. Try to get out there with somebody else that you can do some speed testing with before your race, the days when you're off. Maybe there's a day when it's some conditions that you're not favorable with, and you can get somebody to go speed test. And the other one is without question, if not a top two, it's the ability for your crew to have the ability to communicate with each other comfortably, positively, and that you really, really trust that your spinnaker trimmer is giving you information you need as a driver, as a forward crew, that you're giving your valuable information to your mid crew and your skipper, and the importance of crew communication. And those are some of my wrap up bullet points. And real quick, Greg, Matt, and Dan, give us a 1 minute, some of your bullet points about all these people involved in this tonight to be faster and boat racers with better finishes. And why don't we start with Greg? Let's start with you, buddy.
Well, we talked about a lot of great things. I imagine a lot of you have seen that movie Ford versus Ferrari. I love that because they don't miss a thing, right? They're building the fastest race car, and yet at the end, the whole deal is they're having a great time, and they're going to enjoy the next race, the next Le Mans. And I just think that's what it's all about. But going back to what Matt said, there are areas like boat preparation that, let's face it, there's really, and like Dan said, checking ring dings and making sure stuff's not going to break. There really isn't any excuse, and I don't mean it the way this comes out, for us not to have the boat ready to go, to have the boat, the bottom nice, like Dan said, to have the board right, like Matt said. All it takes is a couple hours. And I know there's always wind out at Carlisle, but every once in a while when there's not, there's time to work on the boat. And, that's the time to really make a difference. And then, like the guy said, you check that box, you got confidence, and then you can go race, the 500 miles of Le Mans and be ready to go.
Right.
Matt, what do you think?
Oh man, so many thoughts. It's been a joy to kind of hear what you guys are thinking. There's, to be succinct here, listen to a lot of advice. I mean, tonight's a great example. We've all got slightly different points of view, and we've had different levels of success. Talk it up. Listen, ask a question, have fun with it. Challenge somebody. If they say, I heard you say A, but I've heard everybody else say B. Why does A work for you? Or, not that you want to instigate a rumble, but what do you think about that? Generate a little bit of a discussion, and everybody learns in that sense, and therefore it can be a lot more fun for more people.
Absolutely. A lot more fun. Dan, fire away, brother. Give us.
Well, I just think reiterating the fun and don't be afraid to bring new people out to the sport either. I mean, I don't want to say you always have to have a seasoned crew. I know we talked a lot about that, and that's not always available to people. So, get a new crew out there and train them and show them how much fun it is, and have a beer afterwards, and keep talking to other people. Some crews are going to pick it up quicker than other crews. We've all had that, and open the sport up to other people is important. And I just want to say it was fun seeing everybody on here. And Greg, say hi to Joanne and Addie for me, and Toby. And it's great to see everybody.
Yeah. So to Dan and Matt and Greg, you guys know I love you guys. You're some of my favorite people in the world. Thank you for doing this tonight. I brought this kind of a, hairball. Let's just get everybody together and do it. So thank you guys. And to everybody else who's joined us. I've seen these numbers at anywhere from 40 to 45 people. And I'm ecstatic about that, that we were able to get this number of people. And Sebastian has put my email address on here. And I would love to, if you guys are interested, to do this again, because I think we're going to be out for another a month to 6 weeks, maybe 2 months at CSA. And I believe I can coerce these guys maybe to do this again. And maybe we can take this up a notch, not necessarily on the beginning points, but maybe we can add a little more on tactics and sail trim, things of that nature. And my last thing is be safe, everybody. We will be back sailing shortly. I know we will. We'll get past this and we'll be out racing really soon. And I appreciate everybody joining and thank you. And I don't know what else to say other than thank you, everybody. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. Take care, you guys.
Ricky.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Peace.
Thanks.
Take care of yourself.
You guys too.
Be safe out there.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Good. Glad everybody enjoyed it. Appreciate
Matt, I did sail out of the West Marine or the West Access fishing ramp on Friday. Nobody tried to arrest me.
Yeah.
Oh, hey.
It's the
maybe
only
it'll be
sailboat on the
Saturday.
lake, huh?
Really?
Well, maybe it'll be on Saturday. I appreciate knowing that. We were really just needing to get out for sanity's sake.
Well, that's what I did on Saturday, or it was Friday. Judy Allen, who has sailed with Eric Sutton quite a bit, her birthday was on Thursday, and I wanted to take her that day, but the wind was just too heavy. So we set the mast on Friday in the fishing parking lot and went out. We had a great time.
Wow,
Well,
good for you.
Thank
Lynn.
you. I appreciate that. I'll text my son because he, we love to go out when it's blowing hard in a 470. It's a lot of fun. Hopefully we'll get a little breeze.
Just be careful. I did touch bottom several times, which I was not thrilled about, but it
Is
was
the
worth
water
it. My
low?
boat is old. It needs that centerboard played with a lot anyway. But Liam and I saw each other and Karen, so
Yeah.
they know that boat was there.
Yeah, the lake is,
Is
the
the
lake's
water low?
it's 2 feet. It's 2 feet low right now, Matt.
Oh, okay.
It's actually, if you're in the CSA harbor, it's above the wall there.
Cool.
It was up about 2 feet above our little standing
Really?
spot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's not as low as you think,
Well,
but
thank
it
you,
is.
Matt.
There's a lot of different areas coming out of that west access that you have to be careful.
Anybody know if West Access is going to be open for business?
They're open.
They're open.
Yeah, but
It is 443.36 right now.
Oh,
Okay.
Oh, that's low.
Okay, so that's 2 feet low.
yeah.
443.36, right.
But it's probably gone down since Friday too. So
Yeah, sounds like
our
it.
boat launched. Our boat launched on Friday, but I still need to get a mast up. So
yeah.
well, and I had to have centerboard and rudder up just to get out of that little area. So we paddled out about 50 yards and then were able to use the rudder and the centerboard some.
Okay.
So be
Hey,
careful.
Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah, nobody hit their boards.
So, hey, Emilio, can you hear me?
who?
I can hear you.
Emilio,
Emilio.
can you hear me?
Yeah,
How, is your family okay over in Italy?
everybody's okay. I
Okay.
mean, I have a lot of friends in Italy, in Milan,
Yeah.
but everybody's okay, thank God.
Good.
That's great.
Good.
What else we got on here still? Mike and I don't do I.
Hey,
Karen
Tommy,
Johnson.
Tommy Paoli.
Where?
I
Yes.
see Tommy Paoli there.
Yeah, he's hiding down there,
Right here.
Working on the boat.
looking like Santa Claus down there.
Yeah. Oh, there he is. Hey, Tommy.
You working on Rick's boat or not?
Rick's boat is out in the yard.
There you go.
Oh,
It's cold.
You guys, that was a terrible experience putting that hull speed on and come back a week later and it's just blistered to nothing. And Tom helped me spend 2 hours and we took it all off. And then we're gonna try to do it again when it warms up.
Man,
Man.
Your pictures looked like it was the surface of an orange.
It looked awful.
It was worse than that. It was like Velcro.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Not the
Yeah, the ACAT guys were all joking with me that I could use it on my backyard to turn up my backyard. So I could plant the seed. That's how bad it
yard
was.
grader.
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
Tom was saying, that's perfect. You're good for the season.
Yeah. Mike, have you ever used hull speed on any of your boats?
I haven't, no. I
Yeah.
have not.
Well, We're going to try it again. I mean, according to Hull Speed, when I called the lab guys, they said we did everything right, and they believe it was.
Really?
They believe it was
temperature?
that batch, but
That batch.
yeah, but
What was the temperature when you did it?
it was mid 50s.
No, it was inside.
That's the
It
other.
was 60, almost 70
It's in
degrees.
a heated garage. So
It's in a heated garage.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would have affected
Shouldn't have
it.
had a problem.
Yeah.
Is Leon still on here? I thought I saw him earlier.
Yeah. He's here.
Well, you could do
Yeah,
like
he's
just get a
back
brand
there
new boat.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Leanne, you're working on your brand new boat you just picked up?
Yeah. I got all the parts in that I got to rig it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Other than that, it's ready to go.
Can we tell everybody if they need any Ronstadt parts, they need to call you now?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that's correct. I have a website up. I still got some work to do on it, but it is live. It is performancesailingsupply.com.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he's loaded with Ronstadt parts now, so he's
Okay.
our local guy now.
Can we get a link to that on the website?
Well,
I
on
don't know
our-
if I can send it to
yeah, send it
you,
right.
and the
Leanne.
website is still in its beginning.
Yeah.
There you. Is that it? Right there.
No, is that it? Can you repeat that?
Oh, there it is. Got it.
Performancesailing.com.
Awesome.
Leon, can you confirm that that's right?
What's that?
In the text. In the
The
text.
URL in the chat?
Performancesailing.com.
Performance Sailing Supply.
Supply.
Oh, supplies for performancesailingsupply.com? Like this?
There it is. I see it.
All right.
Doesn't
you go.
it have your first name on it somewhere? Or your last name?
No.
No,
Oh, you took that off?
I took that off.
Okay, because that was on the invoice.
Right, yeah. That was on the invoice I sent you.
That was a cash-only invoice to you, Tom.
I changed the name about 3 times so far, and I'm still working on the logo, but
Tiger King.
Tiger King.
Oh. I have to admit that we did watch that. And
Oh, it's so awful.
Everybody did. Just
you gotta do?
everybody.
I got
Uh-huh.
wonderful recovering from the replacement ankle that I had put in
Oh
about
yeah.
2 months ago. So, yeah. So,
Be able to walk now with no cut.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I got to. I just got rid of crutches and I'm walking on that now.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So recovering probably another month before I get out of the boot.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Karen Johnson,
Yeah.
are you a boat owner?
Hey, Karen.
I was a boat owner. I sold mine.
Okay.
So
you're-
now I crew.
Who do you crew for?
I crew for
A lot of us.
Whoever will take me.
Okay.
I crew on Saturdays over at West Access with Gary on Pearson, and then I crew sometimes for John Casada, and then Mike. What's Mike's last name?
Pitzer.
Pitzer, thank you.
Pitzer.
So Karen, what are you, a new sailor or intermediate or?
Well, it's kind of complicated. My late husband, who some of you guys might know, who used to race over CSA, his name's Kevin Budd. He raced, we sailed up in Michigan. We had a boat up on Lake Michigan out of Milwaukee for about 15 years. And so I also race up there. So.
I knew Kevin.
Did you?
Yeah, and I knew he remember him. He used to sail with Kip Williams some.
Yeah, Kip's a really, really good friend.
Right, and he taught at Narings Hall, right?
Yes, that's where we met. I teach there now.
Yeah. My stepdaughter from my first marriage went to Narings and had him.
Okay.
It was a math teacher, right?
Science, chemistry.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Was
But
it Kip Williams?
Kevin was a great guy.
Thank you.
So
Yeah,
Karen,
yeah.
what did you think of this tonight? Did you get anything out of it?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a lot out of it. Yeah. Yeah. I got a lot out of it. So.
Good. And Liam, how about you, Liam?
Yes, of course. It was great because I'm not really a born racer, but listening to the four main guys chit chat, it kind of made it kind of helped me.
Good. Good. That's the important thing. Who else is on here? A lot of you. And Shirley, how are you doing, Shirley?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I enjoyed listening to it tonight. Got some good hints, and it's nice to be just thinking sailing, even though we can't get out and do it just yet.
Sure.
Definitely.
So I asked Sebastian to put up kind of a comment question to see if people would like to do this again, and
Yeah.
there was 100% on yes, we should do this again. So let me talk to these superstar sailor friends of ours, and maybe in a week or so we'll come up with another topic. Maybe we can try to get a little more advanced, and maybe we can also do one of just catamaran. So, because I know that's kind of, I'm involved in the catamaran thing. Don't spread that around too much.
I think, Rick, I think especially for the adult sailing seminar.
Yeah.
So we can get together instead of going someplace, we can do it this way.
Well, that's a great idea because, as you know, Emilio, I sent out the notice to the adult sail instructors.
Right.
And I invited that class is full, if you can believe that.
Right. That's great.
We filled it up, which shocks me, absolutely shocks me, that with what's going on in the world, that it actually 2 days ago, the registration closed because it's full. And I don't even know how to begin to think that people are still hoping.
When is it scheduled for, Rick? When's it scheduled for?
Last weekend in May. So I guess there's a lot of confidence from people that this will subside and we'll still do it, which is fine. It's great.
Or maybe they're figuring you might move it later in the summer or something.
Well, that's what I sent to all the students, that most likely, well, no, should we postpone it, we'll probably move it back to September, because June is packed at CSA. July and August are heinously hot, and September is a wonderful sailing month at CSA.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Generally is. So,
Early September.
What's that?
Early September.
Yeah, and the problem is the weekend before the whale is the weekend right after Labor Day. So I don't know if that's good or not. So I sent it out to the students to reply back. So that's all good. Anyway, all right, everybody.
Well, thank you.
All right, that was great. Everybody. That was a great.
See you all. Thank you.
Big thank you to Sebastian for helping set this up. So thank you.
All right, that was fun.
Sebastian. Good idea.
You're welcome.
So
all right, it was great.
And we'll try to do this again in another week to 10 days. We'll do another one, okay?
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm in. Take care, y'all.
See y'all. Bye-bye.
Sebastian for putting it together.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.